So after a couple of years of being on the revision team, there was a senior that all this time was taking care of the retakes, the client notes. And for whatever reason, he had to move away from that. And so they offered me the role. So for a while after that, I was managing retakes. A lot of the skills that I had acquired in editing applied, mainly the organizational part and the having to juggle things at different stages. That experience came in very handy for me at that time. But on top of that, this is where I found it particularly interesting, was I was kind of coordinating the different departments at the retake stage. The way I interpreted my role was almost like a second unit director, if we want to compare to live action things, in that I was coordinating everything after the client feedback so the director could focus on the first version of the episode before it went out to the client. Now, every now and then I had questions that I had to go up to him, but what really I tried to do was to free him up, to not have to worry about the retake side of things. And also with the experience I had in QC, that came in handy too, because every scene I would touch, I would give another round of QC, and so things went back to the client even cleaner. And we got fewer and fewer revision notes after that, at least from the client. And eventually we got to the end of that contract and there was more work coming. There was just a bit of a break between the two, about a month, if I remember correctly. So what they did, rather than lay me off for a little bit, was they had me work on another contract. And this one was 3D work, working with Maya. Now, I had learned 3D in college and had kind of tinkered with it on and off, right, in my own time over the years. But I never knew Maya. I never sat down and took the time to really learn how to use it. But they were willing to, give me a shot. And, whatever happened, I would only be there for a month anyways. So hopefully it wouldn't be too much trouble. But they wanted to keep me on in one way or another. And so what happened was, as the show was winding down, it came to a point where I think the last 2 weeks was just me and the director addressing the client notes and taking the last few episodes over the finish line until they were locked. Those last 2 weeks were a little slow. Kind of reminds me of when things were slow in editing, because what I did this time, knowing that I would be working with Maya, but having very little experience with it, I requested them to send me a scene or a rig or something to play around with, just to try and get a bit of a head start before I got to actually working on that 3D show. And so the last couple of weeks, when I wasn't working on addressing the client notes, I was basically watching YouTube tutorials and just tinkering with the scene that I had been given. So when I got to actually start on the show, I don't know if I'd say hit the ground running, but, jogging, walking, maybe not moving quickly, but I didn't start on it from a standstill. Now, my work on the first week was a little rough. Week 2 was better. By week 3, I was probably at a level that matched the average animator on the show. And then week 4 came, which was my last week on it. And I remember having a chat with the supervisor and they said, you're a pretty good animator. And I'm like, I was a senior. So then starting on the new project, I was actually promoted to animation lead. And so at first we were just basically getting the show ready for animators to join in. There was some stock animation to do. We also had a chance to play around with the character builds a little bit and give the builds department some feedback. And the way we would work on this project, we were trying something a little different, where as an animation lead, I would have some scenes to animate myself, but it'd be a smaller quota, because the other part of my job would be supervising a small team. I was working under a supervisor. So the supervisor had the larger part of the team, and then 3 or 4 people would come under me, and there'd be a rotation. I think it was every 3rd or 4th episode or something like that, there'd be a switch. So people were coming in and out of my team. I think the idea was just to expose people to a different supervisor, just to get a different take on their work, have another pair of eyes on how they were doing things and get a different kind of feedback to help them improve. And this was also a good way to dip my toes into the world of supervising. They hadn't had me as a supervisor yet, and I had done well with the demos, the tutorials that I had done. And so as a animation lead, I was also in a position to do demos if ever the need arose. Because I had a smaller team, it also gave animators who needed more attention that opportunity to have more attention from a supervisor who wasn't distracted with having to oversee so many people or so much work. For some animators, my style of supervising was probably different in that where some supervisors like to go in and fix a scene, I always want to give the animator a first shot at fixing something. And the other thing is that my philosophy was that posing has to work before it can be pretty. And so a lot of my focus was on little technical things, little details that I would note as someone who did QC. The benchmark that I always gave people was that a pose had to look like it was drawn. If you're looking at a frame that you posed out with these digital puppets, right, these rigs, if you're looking at a frame and it doesn't look like you drew it with a pencil or a pen or whatever, then the posing has to be adjusted to match that. What I've found is once you address that, a lot of the appeal things fall into place. It looks better from the get-go if things are technically correct to begin with, usually.